Okay, we're going to get started. Hi, everyone. This is John Palinkas. I'm one of the partners at CastlePointe. Our webinar today is Optimizing the Business Value of ITSM Investments, and our presenter is one of our CastlePointe Alliance partners, Shane Day. And just wanted to remind everyone on this that this is a series of free lunch webinars that CastlePointe hosts. It's about transformation. And we talk about cultural change, organizational effectiveness, and driving business value. They're typically 45-minute discussions, although we have run over sometimes when it's gotten very energetic questions. And speaking of questions, if you look on your screen, you'll see there's an area where you can enter questions at any time during this conference. And we'll try to save a few minutes at the end to respond to and answer those questions. So as I said, anytime during the conference, please type in your questions and we'll see it. I don't know how to pronounce it, but there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. That's one of the old-time sayings, except today, basically what we'll be doing is we'll be awarding two $25 gift cards to TGI Fridays. So for two of you, it truly will be a free lunch today. So again, today's webinar is on optimizing the business value of ITSM investments, presented by Shane Day. Shane, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, John. A little bit of agenda first so we know what we're getting into. Talk a little bit about what most of us are trying to accomplish with our service management initiatives. Look at this thing called IT Service Value Management as a business service management enabler for resource optimization of those investments and achieving or maximizing the related business value. A little bit about the global interest in ITSPM, who's looking at it, who's using it, where's it coming from. Where to obtain some additional guidance on that, and then open it up for some general question and answer session. Looking back a little bit, current environment for most of us, we've got this ongoing, endless application change request stream coming in. Process re-engineering activities in conjunction with traditional ITIL initiatives, ongoing desktop refreshes, network upgrades, voice over IP implementations, general quality initiatives, all these different activities that are going on. Many of them are day to day, and then we try to add into that, ITSM, BSM initiatives, IT service management and business service management, articulated in the ITIL service strategy title. So while those are going on, many of us are trying to accomplish a number of things from the management perspective, not the least of which is improving service quality, both internally and from the customer's perspective. Trying to optimize those resources, being able to effectively communicate the business value of the technology services we deliver, and in the process facilitating, BITA or business IT alignment, and being able to justify and prioritize service improvements as it relates to those ITIL, ITSM initiatives, and not only being able to justify them, but understanding how much is enough. The realization that we don't have to be a level 5 maturity on everything we do, and not everything we do has maximum value to the customer. Some things we do they need, but they value other things more. And it's really good that we have a good, clear understanding of what the customer expectations are and prioritize accordingly. Little summary of where we're at in most organizations. The black line represents budget and staff. Most organizations, they're lagging, particularly government organizations or government-funded organizations. At the same time, as represented by the blue line, a little bit higher, the complexity and project workload is increasing. Customers are bringing new things to us faster, and new technology is being deployed quicker than ever. But at the same time, as indicated by the yellow dotted lines there, their tolerance for variability is decreasing. And we're kind of working in this perfect storm here. And in many cases, we need a way to bring those yellow and blue lines back down in line with the budget and staff, make sure we're actually matching resources to expectations. Proven approach is that, this represents IT service value management. 4 steps: defining the services that we deliver, in a couple of different levels that we'll get into deeper later, assessing the business value of those services, then measuring our performance in delivering those services, both internally and externally, and looking for gaps between those two, And then a little bit more objectively, choosing and being able to justify, based on some data that we've collected, the appropriate service improvements and to the right level. Make sure we're applying the right amount of resources and not over-allocating resources. Core of SVM is this concept of business value. Where is the value in the services that IT delivers, or as an IT service provider that we deliver? And coming to accept that the service assets and the IT services in and of themselves don't have any inherent value. It's what the business does with those services and hopefully achieving the correct business outcomes. That's where the value is created. Look at it from another perspective, a little bit more poignant. The value is really created at the boundary of the enterprise. If we're a Type 1, Type 2 service provider inside of the enterprise, if that interaction between the internal customers and users of our services and the external end users and end customers out there in the marketplace, it's where they interact and where IT services support those interactions and hopefully enhance those interactions. That's where the real business value is in the services that we provide to the enterprise. Looking at it from a little bit more high-level perspective, some of the things we're going to try to do here, or try to understand how to do, is to delaminate the services. We talk about IT services very generically sometimes, but it's really important to be able to differentiate between the business services, sometimes known as customer-facing services, and the technical services, also known as resource-facing services. And being able to build out that map and understand what it looks like and what the linkages and hierarchies are between those technical services and business services, and then looking at the raw processes and resources and activities down in the bowels of IT at the bottom of this diagram. Once we understand this and how these are connected, we can truly build business cases and talk about business IT alignment, where we're investing resources in the bottom of that stack or up any one of those blue pipes, those linkages through the hierarchy, to the high-value services. And it's when we can begin to frame up those resource burns in terms of those high-value services that the business and the customers look back at us and say, yes, you are in alignment with us. You understand what's most important to us, and you're investing in reducing the risk associated with those services. They get it. And the pushback on resource requests gets a lot less. With that, as a preface, we'll dig into the 4 steps. If you remember the 4 circles we showed a little bit earlier. Number 1 is defining the services that we deliver and understanding the service portfolio hierarchy. Service definition is the basis for all service improvements, whether you're looking at ITIL, COBIT, NGOS, and SID from the telemanagement forum. They very clearly articulate before you can begin process improvements, you need to understand what the services are that those processes are there to support. Unfortunately, we kind of circle back to the service catalog sometimes. And it's a little bit more of an inside-out or outside-in approach that we want to take from an ITSM perspective, understanding what's the customer's perspective on these services and what's most important to the customer and managing accordingly. Look at it from a little different perspective, even approaching it from the marketplace at the top of that stack, outside of our enterprise. What are the products or services that our organization delivers to that marketplace, whether it's for-profit or not-for-profit, a corporation, a government entity, a university? It doesn't really matter. There's something, some product or some service that our organization delivers out there in the marketplace. We need to keep that in mind. It's a great starting point. Who are the end users and end customers that consume that product or service out there in the marketplace? Who are the users and customers inside of our own enterprise that interact with those end users and end customers, and how do they interact, and what are the most important interactions? And then what are the customer-facing services or business services that we as IT provide to those users, customers, end users, and customers to facilitate that interaction? Then look at the supporting resource-facing services and processes and raw resources. It's only when we take this approach that we can truly start talking about business IT alignment and being able to clearly articulate where is the business value in the services that we provide. From the perspective of an internal IT organization, the Type 1 or Type 2 organization is defined by ITIL. This is where these constructs of customer-facing services and resource-facing services fit in. Again, somewhat analogy with the business service catalog and the technical service catalog. In the case of outsourcing arrangements, even hardware suppliers, software suppliers, there's raw resources coming into the internal IT organization. Those in turn are used to create the resource-facing services. They're the raw material that goes into those, which in turn create the IT product offerings, which support the customer-facing services, which support the customers and users. And you could arguably put another stack on top of there of the end users and end customers out there in the marketplace. There's a very clear relationship between these things. What is a service? How do we define a service? Customer-facing services, the customers are aware of the services. They know they're using them. Oftentimes, they're common applications, systems that they use. Frequently, software names, SAP comes to mind, Oracle Financials. But if you can even delaminate that a little bit further and understand the business service that those particular applications are supporting, it really helps foster this entire discussion. Common examples are CRM systems, Salesforce.com, any sort of internal CRM system, sales order entry systems, telephone systems, voice communications, if you will. And then the other type of service is the resource-facing service. Customers are typically unaware of them. They don't know that they're actually happening or that they're being offered or supported in the background. RFSs are what CFSs are comprised of. Some common examples there would be network monitoring, DNS, backup servers, any of the XMDBs that are referenced within the ITSM domain. Things that are critical, they're essential for the operation of IT and the delivery of those services. But many times the customer just doesn't know they're going on in the background. So how do we identify a CFS? We know what the two are. How do we clearly identify them? Number one, look at the perception, the customer's perception while they're using the service. Do they know that they're using that service? Probably a CFS. The second rule is, do they have the ability to acquire that service? Can it be clearly specified by the customer, and can they go acquire it by itself? If that's the case, it probably is a customer-facing service. The next question is, if those are the CFSs, what are the RFSs? Well, the bottom line there is anything that's not a CFS by default becomes a CFS. So within step one here, we've already made great strides towards service catalog development here. We know what the business services are, and we know what the technical services are. Don't have to spend a lot of time defining the technical services because by default, they're everything that's not a business service. That's a little high level of step one. Moving into step two, assessing the value of the services. What ITSVM proposes is looking at the risk associated with failing to deliver that service as a measurement of the business value. ITIL itself, moving, COBIT, CRAM, management of risk, also from APMG. A number of these risk management tools clearly indicate that high risk sensitivity is an excellent indicator of high business value. And in assessing that risk, we can start to determine which services are most important and why from the customer's perspective. And we don't have to speculate about it. It's real easy to go out and collect this risk information. It also helps us understand and differentiate between the customer viewpoints. What's the difference between their wants? The things that have high value tend to be needs. The things that have low value tend to be wants. And sometimes they don't even know. And I think going through this risk assessment exercise helps them understand. And I think sometimes throttle their change requests or their new service requests because they start thinking about them differently. And ultimately drives business IT alignment. What we're trying to accomplish here is understand which services are most important to the enterprise at a strategic level and on down, and allocate resources accordingly at the right levels. A little expansion on the star chart that was shown earlier. There's a number of different places that value can be created, even on the back end of the enterprise, the suppliers providing services or software or hardware to the IT organization or to the enterprise as a whole. In fact, that's a great question. If you can't clearly identify some value associated with that supplier, some questions should be asked or some due diligence. But also on the front of the enterprise. I mentioned earlier, we're going to try to differentiate between the users and customers that are inside of the enterprise, towards the top of the light blue box there, and the end users and end customers that are out there in the marketplace. And more, as the internet has been adopted, there's two different touch points. There's the old touch points where the users and customers, a classic example would be sales, the sales department within your organization, probably interacts with the end users and end customers out there in the marketplace. But there's value created in that interaction, primarily revenue. They're generating revenue for the organization with that interaction. It used to be that the sales department could buffer IT. If there was a problem with the IT system, worst case, they could grab a piece of paper and a pen and take down the order over the phone and buffer us a little bit if we had a failure in our systems or services. But as we move down to the bottom left corner of that chart, as we see more and more web-enabled applications and self-service portals for our end users and customers to come directly to us, that buffer is disappearing. And sometimes we hear arguments about, well, those issues related to interacting with the customer, that's really sales problem. Well, we hear what they're saying, but it's actually IT's problem now too. You hear all this talk today about IT and the business being integrated. Neither one can live without it. IT needs to step up to the plate and say, okay, we need to understand what the customer's expectations are, and we need to start managing that value experience in the lower left corner and realizing and accepting that we take responsibility for that. We own that relationship. Although we may be working hand in hand with the people in that upper left corner, the users and customers who own that more traditional relationship. In looking at the value, we also need to help customers look beyond the traditional ROI analysis, internal rate of return analysis. There's more to value of many services than just dollars and cents. There can be liability reduction associated with some services, competitive advantage, regulatory compliance in some places. You're supporting a service for the enterprise that you're not making money on. In fact, it's costing you a lot of money, but it's almost an insurance package. You're trying to avoid some liability due to a breach of that regulatory issue later on. And then potentially cost reductions associated with some of the services. To do this, we really need to engage the business and the customers, to assess the value, the service value, and to assess the risk as a measurement of that value. Again, risk is one of the most accurate measurements of value as indicated by not just ITIL, but COBIT, CRAM, MORE, just a handful of them, any of the risk management best practices or methodologies you can reference. We'll talk about it. Risk is also something the business understands. Sometimes there's a reluctance to go talk to the customer about the value of our services. Well, if you approach it from the perspective of reducing risk associated with that service, they'll typically warm up to that discussion very quickly. They understand risk reduction, and they're always looking for ways to do it and accomplish it. We have to work with the customers to get that risk score, or that indirect score, or reference to value. It's not something we can create on our own. Lacking any risk management teams or organizations inside of the enterprise, we can fall back on what ITIL recommends, which is the CIA assessment when looking at risk, looking at confidentiality, integrity, and availability. If there is a risk management team in the organization, we always recommend bringing them into the discussion, using what they have, if you can get the metrics that you need quickly. Always, is it going to take 6 weeks or 6 months to get this? If they have something in place, you can get your hands on the metrics quickly. That's great. Alternatively, look at ITIL. It's out there. It's proven. A lot of people use it. Looking back at step one, we've defined the services. We've differentiated between the business services and the technical services, CFSs and the RFSs, if you will. We've assessed the business value of those services. So now we know what are the services, and we can stack rank those services based on value. Now we're going to move on to measuring our performance in delivering that service. And we want to identify gaps between our performance and the expectations of the customers and users. Again, it's important to emphasize that we're doing both. It's internal and external measurements, not either or. And realizing that the internal measurements tend to be indicators of capability and predictors of quality, but not true measurements of quality in and of itself. It's those external measurements that are where the real quality measurements come from. Traditional gap analysis applies. Larger gaps equals less quality or utility to customers, bigger opportunities for improvement if they're associated with high-value services. a large gap associated with a low-value service may not stack up. That may be something that could be backburnered for a while. And again, it helps us understand and differentiate between customer expectations and perceptions. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in a moment. Also, as indicated, gaps indicate opportunities for improvement, process or service improvement, potential resource reallocation, or even product or service selection. We may uncover some opportunities in some services that we're not delivering along the way. Again, we want to emphasize we need to be measuring service quality from two perspectives, both internal, which we often refer to as quality of service, and external, which is better referred to as quality of experience. And it's the combination of those two that's going to get us where we want to go. But most importantly, the quality of experience from the external perspective is arguably the most important. We can have the best data in the world internally, but if the customer just doesn't see it, they may look elsewhere to acquire that service or partner with somebody else for that service. A classic example would be plain old telephone service, good old POTS. Your local carrier may tell you they have 5 nines of availability on their network, but if you pick up that handset and hear silence, their 5 nines don't mean very much to you. Looking at the internal service quality metrics, the more traditional metrics, quality of service, if you will, they're predictive only. They can help us predict that quality of experience, that true quality measurement from the customer's perspective. But in and of themselves, they don't actually measure QOE. So we need to be measuring from both perspectives. And there's some tools that help you do that. Again, variability is a good predictor of quality. If there's high variability as you go out and assess quality of experience, that may be an indicator that there's low quality there also. Elaborating a little bit more on this difference between expectations and perceptions. What did the customer expect to receive, and what's their perception of what they actually did receive? ITSM references something that's been around for almost 2 decades now called ServQual, which came out of the non-technical services industries. It's a very, very easy to understand model of where to look for those gaps. It's a little bit small on here, but gap 5 in particular is the starting point. Before we look at anything internal, let's go talk to the customers and see, is there a gap between what they expected to receive and their perception of what they actually did receive? If there's not a gap there, our issues may not be as big as we think. And if there is a gap there, then we start working backwards through gaps 4, 3, 2, and 1. And again, there's some tools out there that automate that process. So in step 4, we're going to take all this data that we just collected in steps 1, 2, and 3 and present something called service value modeling as a method, a very objective method to choose and justify and build business cases for service improvements or new services. And we want to focus on the high-value services first, in particular high-value services that may have low quality or capability associated with them. The objective is to be able to justify projects based on business value and to very clearly articulate and communicate to the business leadership why we are investing in certain things. We're investing in this RFS or a process or a resource that supports that RFS in support of the highest value service that you've indicated to us. We're trying to reduce the risk in failing to deliver that service at the expected service level. An additional benefit, too, is that we improve project success rates because we've obtained this data, and particularly the value and risk data, from the customers. They have buy-in as a stakeholder. The information about this decision came from them. Now they have a vested interest to make sure they see this through to completion. It goes miles towards effectively communicating business value and business IP alignment. What we're going to create is this thing called a service value map or a service value model. And we're going to plot services on there as dots. I'm going to walk through with you here in a minute and show you how this data gets put on there. But we're looking for a number of different things, potentially overfunded services or underfunded services with an objective of balancing our resources across these services or service improvement opportunities. I mentioned earlier, the dots represent the services that were defined in stage 1. The size of that, actually the vertical position of that dot represents the value. If it floats to the top of the chart, it has high value. If it goes to the bottom, it's a lower value service. Our capability metrics, which could come from a number of different places, are represented on the horizontal axis. Low capability drifts to the left. High capability drifts out to the right. Service quality, as measured from the customer's perspective, is indicated inversely by the size of the dot that represents the service. Low quality would actually show up as a large dot. The intent there is we want this chart to speak to us and our business partners. Anything that really jumps off this chart should get our attention and require some additional due diligence. With that in mind, low quality from the customer perspective is represented by a large dot. If there's any variability data, which again can come from internal or external, there's a number of different places to get that. If the data is fluctuating and we see variability, that'll be represented by concentric rings. Again, we're trying to get the information to jump off this page and talk to us. Variability is an indicator of potential low quality, so we want to, that should draw our attention here. We end up with a chart that could look something like this for a simple chart that had 3 services. Sorry about that. The first place we'll typically look is the upper left corner. Are there any high-value services that have low capability metrics associated with them? More importantly, if it shows up as a large dot and possibly concentric rings, that should really get our attention. There may be low quality from the customer's perspective, but they've told us it's a high-value service. It's very important to them. There's variability associated in the delivery or the perception of that. That requires some attention. That's where service improvement is justified. They don't say immediately yes to the resources, and we need to do some resource reallocation. One of the places we can look is the lower left corner of this map. Are there perhaps any services that have low value from the customer or the business perspective where we're over-delivering? We have immense capability. We have skill sets that are just off the chart, but when we talk to the customer, that's not something that's important to them. Maybe we can reallocate some of those resources associated with the lower right services to the upper left services. The intent is we're trying to shift, there's a band which may be hard to see on your screen there, from the lower left corner to the upper right corner, which we call the zone of tolerance. And we're trying to shift these services into that zone of tolerance. The premise being low value services, we can live with low capability and maturity. High value services, we can justify additional resources to ramp up in that area. This is where we start getting into, we can truly and clearly articulate that we are optimizing the resource burn and we're falling into alignment with the business value and the business objective. I said earlier there were 4 steps to SVM. There's actually 5. One is integrating it into the management DNA. It should be a regularly scheduled activity. Depending on the type of organization, and that could be a whole different discussion, it could be as frequently as every 6 to 9 months. It could be as long as every 18 to 24. It just depends on what industry you're in, how quickly that industry moves, and even within that industry, where do you slot in? Are you a premier provider within your industry vertical, or are you a cost-only provider down near the bottom? Neither one of them is bad. They're both appropriate. They're both great business models, but you have to know where you reside within your industry to understand how to allocate resources accordingly. Are we going to listen more to our internal end user or users and customers for advice, which is typically the case with the cost-oriented providers? Or are we going to listen to the end users and end customers out there in the marketplace, or at least put more weight on what they have to say? And that's typically the case from organizations that are the premier providers within their particular industry. Again, what we're trying to accomplish is delaminate those business services from the technical services, understand the linkages and hierarchies, and be able to clearly articulate and associate our investments at the bottom with the highest value services at the top. Why does it work? Why does SVM work? It focuses on the services, not the processes initially. We'll get to the processes, but we need to start with the services. It also focuses on the value of those services and the quality, the perceived quality of those services. It integrates a number of different best practices, not just ITIL, but Six Sigma, PMBOK, some of the risk management activities, NGOS and SID out of the telemanagement form. It's kind of best of breed. And realizing that the 80-20 rule applies. You're going to get 80% of your return out of the first 20% of activities in any one of those areas. It also facilitates very non-technical, business-oriented communications with the customers and business leadership. Real fast and easy to learn, too. The basics can be taught to folks in a matter of days. It doesn't take weeks or months. Who's interested in it? Business and IT leadership, business and process analysts, kind of on the perimeter of IT organizations sometimes. The PMO directors, project managers, folks that are in the hot seat for resource allocation issues, and service management consultants and instructors. At a professional organization level, we've seen interest in giving presentations for SIM, PMI, IIBA, and the business analyst community. many ITSM leagues and national conferences as far away as Australia and New Zealand in the last year. And who's interested in it, both domestically and worldwide? You'll see financial services, healthcare, service providers, even mining, large mining companies there. Worldwide, and even government entities. We did some work with the New South Wales Road and Traffic Authority last fall when we were over in Australia. Not easy to get government agencies interested in this stuff, but they. The real power in SVM is the modeling. Having the performance data is not enough anymore. We need to have effective ways to display and communicate this information and build business cases based on this information in a way that our customers and business peers understand, and that's what we're pursuing. How can you learn more? There's a number of different articles out there, and CIO Update, that's one of them. BSM Now is a tool that I referenced earlier that actually automates some of the data collection for assessing the value of the services and assessing the perceived quality of the services, how the performance, if you will, how well we're doing. BSM Review has lots of ongoing articles about business service management. More tactically, through CastlePointe, we can facilitate 2 to 4 hour BSM, SVM executive sessions, 1-day essentials certification training, which is provides a certification from the International Association of Business Service Management. And it's not uncommon to be engaged with anywhere from 2 weeks to 2 months, I guess, on average. BSM, ITSM consulting or facilitation engagements to lead clients or organizations around the track at the time.
Okay,
With that,
Shane,
I
thank
will
you.
turn it back over to John and any Q&A that you guys might have.
Yep, Shane, thank you very much. And again, we've got a couple questions, but if anyone on the line has any additional questions, please feel free to type them in, and we'll see them as they come up. But one of the questions that we have that came up earlier was that you talked about defining services. That always seems to be a stumbling block for many organizations. Do you have any hints that you can provide us on best ways to go about that?
Yeah, starting with the business services from the customer's perspective. And again, starting with the business analyst community. If you happen to be working with an organization that has business analysts, they can be a great starting point. Also, any risk organizations, disaster recovery people, oftentimes those DR folks will have already had those discussions as far as defining the business services and understanding what are the most important business services, what needs to be brought up and in what order if there was a disaster. Those groups can be a great starting point for defining services. But again, start with the business services first, because if you can clearly articulate and hone in on what those customer-facing services are, the technical services just fall into the other bucket by default. Many times it's easier to have that technical service discussion and build the technical service catalog by yourself in the back room. If you don't have to discuss that service with the customer, don't do it. But start with the customer and understand what their perception of the services is first. That's going to be the smaller group of the services.
It's funny when you say start with the business service. One of the things that I've seen a lot of companies stumble on in that area also is what they actually define as a business service. I've seen companies basically say provisioning a new server. Well, that's something we do all the time, and they try to define that as a business service.
Now, the definition really needs to come from the customer's perspective, and depending on the service, there can be 2 groups. It can be either that internal user customer group, or it can be the external end user end customer group. And it may be weighted. In some situations, the service is used by both, and there needs to be a very clear, honest, candid discussion about what weight are we going to assign to the voice of these 2 different groups. Is the end user and end customer group going to carry more weight, or is the internal user and customer group going to carry more weight? Again,
but that kind of relates to one of the questions that we have when you talk about end users and customers. I mean, what's the best way to kind of engage with the end customer? Because most times IT organizations basically have an organization that's liaison to a business unit or something, and they typically don't interact with those people. So what's good ways to engage with them?
If those liaisons are in place, service level managers, service level liaisons, there's a number of different titles that go with them. That's an excellent starting point. If lacking those, if there's any business analysts or business architects involved, they can be good starting points or good facilitators for that discussion. Yeah, you definitely wouldn't have your lower level, tier 1, tier 2 people leading up the discussion. It would be somebody who presides over the service management initiative. Not just ITSM. In fact, we've had limited success approaching those discussions. There's a lot of communications that has to go on, invitations, almost a sales initiative to get the customers to show up to that meeting. It does require effort, but if you can make that happen, the payback is immense. Because at the end of the day, that's what matters the most, is the customer's perception about this service, particularly with the blossoming, mushrooming SaaS and cloud provider market. If you're not having that discussion, that real honest, candid discussion about what's important to you and where do you see the value in what we do and what's your perception of quality in what we do, I'll guarantee you there's a SaaS or cloud provider out there that is having that discussion with them.
Okay. So that's kind of the end of our questions that I have, unless anyone online has another question that they'd like to type in. Okay, if not, copies of the presentation are available. You can click the download box on the left and download it, or you can also contact Shane. His contact info is on the screen. Shane, I want to thank you for taking the time to deliver this presentation.
Thank you for facilitating, John.
All right. That ends our conference. Everyone can disconnect now. Thank you.